The millionaire spokesman for this new tribe was born here in Eltham, a South London suburb, 23 years ago. He was one of 6 children. His father was a builder. His education was minimal. In fact, he was expelled from school for truancy. His former headmaster once described him as a down-market Danny LaRue.
My headmaster was really, really into kind of nostalgia. You know, he used to wear like a board and tassel and a cape with 1,000 pleats. I mean, I always wish he'd give me his cape, but that's about it, you know. I didn't really have... I mean, when I was at school, the sort of thing my headmaster would do would be to come along the corridor and, like, walk into a classroom, and if somebody was talking, throw their book out the window and then force them to go and collect it out of the street, which, to me, isn't really a high form of education, you know. And it's the sort of thing I reacted against. I mean, whether that was, in his eyes, illogical, I never really agreed with him.
If you trace back your own development, I mean, why was it then that you decided to dress the way that you dress now? I mean, what was it about your life that made you do this?
Well, I didn't come from an oppressed background, you know. I'm not reacting against my father, which is what the press always tries to do. You know, they try to create that kind of illusion. There isn't an explanation.
What does he make of you now, your father? What kind of relationship you have?
Well, you know, I don't know whether he even thinks about it anymore. It's like he's so used, you know, like my mother used to kind of, she would be washing up the pots and she would say, oh, look at that bloke, he's got pink socks on. And there'd be me kind of sitting there with, like, plastered in makeup, you know, like putting my eyebrows on. It's like, when something's that close to home, you don't really consider it to be abnormal.
It took a degree of guts, of course, to do what you did. I mean, it takes a degree of guts to walk out in the street and not conforming.
Well, I think what it is that I've never really been driven by that fear of alienation that kids have. I mean, at school, I never really, you know, other kids would brag about their sexual conquest and who they'd beaten up. I never really joined in. I've always hated the idea of joining in, you know, just doing things for the sake of it. I mean, I think, you know, if somebody's going to have a conversation with me about cars, I'm not going to just, like, talk about cars because I know nothing about them. But there are certain things which I do enjoy talking about. And even as a kid, I knew exactly what I thought in my own mind. You know, a lot of kids, they take a long time to grow up. You know, like, at school, they call the fat boy fatty, and they call the person with glasses four eyes, and they kind of never progress from that. Whereas, I mean, at school, I always looked around at everyone and thought, God, how boring are you, you know?
At this time, though, I mean, when you were feeling different, and you thought that your schoolmates are boring and the educational system didn't suit you at all, did you have an idea of what you wanted to do? I mean, did you say, I'm going to be that kind of person?
No. I think that was the trouble, that all the kids at my school had an idea of what they were going to do. You know, they were going to be carpenters, or they were going to be bank clerks, or, you know, pilots, or the girls were going to be stewardesses. I mean, I didn't feel different because I'd grown an extra leg. I just, you know, I just felt a lot more logical than the people around me, I think. I mean, after I left school, I spent about 4 years just enjoying myself. But when I think back on it, I mean, it was like going to all those clubs and sort of being involved in that scene. All the creativeness, in a sense, made me what I am, but also the kind of the bad qualities of that creativeness as well, like the way that a lot of those people remained stagnant. You know, they spent the whole time talking about what they were going to do. Whereas, I mean, I've always been willing to accept other people's opinions on things. Like, for instance, when I started Culture Club and I met John Moss, John really changed me as a person.
What way?
He stopped me from being defensive about the way I looked. You know, I mean, I used to go around, if anyone said anything, I would attack them.
What would you say?
Just thump them.
Oh, just thump them?
Anyone said anything to me, I wouldn't sort of like defend myself or have an argument. I'd just say, oh, you go to hell and whack. I'd just like throw a drink over somebody. You know, if anybody said, why do you look like that, I would really go crazy. It wouldn't be sort of, I wouldn't sit down and like where I am with you and say, oh, it's this and it's that. You know, I just realised that by defending yourself, you know, you kind of made yourself look stupid. It's like, you know, you always read about Michael Jackson saying Michael is not gay. Michael's psychiatrist has confirmed he is not gay. And everybody says, well, he must be if he keeps going around telling everyone he's not. You know, whereas, like, I think if you keep defending yourself, it's the worst thing you can do. You know, it's like, I don't know, like people say to me, oh, you know, like, you know, are you homosexual? And I say, yes, because I have sex at home, you know. It's like, I just try to make the whole light of the situation because, I mean, there are certain things which are sacred to me, but my image really isn't sacred to me.
What's strange, of course, about, well, not strange, I mean, but if you become famous like you, people have a preconceived idea of what they're going to meet before they meet you.
Yeah.
I mean, I did. I mean, I thought, for instance, you'd be a lot smaller, a lot more slender and slight than you are. I mean, you're a big bloke, aren't you?
Yeah. I'm a man. I'm man, Betty. people do, but that's great. I mean, because people have this terrible misconception, and then when you meet them, it's like even worse than they thought. They kind of get really freaked out. But that's good for me, because people, it's like people always imagine the worst. I mean, people always imagine I'm going to be really kind of cool, you know, like sort of David Sylvian or David Bowie, that kind of thing, you know. So, you know, think for hours about what I'm saying, you know. You know, like, I mean, the way that a lot of these sort of people, these weird and wonderful people use kind of words like quintessential and, you know, things like that, like big words that mean nothing really to them. I mean, I'm just a normal person. That's the thing. I mean, I think that's what freaks people out the most. That I am actually quite ordinary, you know, without sort of conforming to an ordinary way of dressing. But I mean, what's in my head isn't that ordinary. But you know, I don't really think that outrageousness has got anything to do with the way you look. I really don't. I never have done. You know, and I even from a very early age, I always used to think, well, I mean, people like Mark Bolan and David Bowie, I always knew why they, you know, like, because my brother used to be into Mark Bolan before he became poppy, before he made hits, and I always knew why he did it.
It was here, in the King's Road, a street not unused to accommodating people both beautiful and bizarre, that Boy George started work.
My first ever job was in the King's Road. I worked in an antique store, and you know, selling antique clothes and like odds and ends, and that was really sort of the best education I ever had, really, because I met people. You know, like, I mean, people, you know, talk about outrageousness. I mean, when I was a kid, you know, I used to come up to the West End from Woolwich, where I lived, and I remember coming up one day and seeing a woman with like multicoloured hair, and going back to my mum and saying, God, I see this woman with all coloured hair. But then there's so many things going on. I mean, like, punk rock was going on in suburbia before it ever hit the headlines, you know. But, you know, where I came from, they used to call us the Arnolds. We used to, like, wear bin liners and safety pins and all these kind of odd things. And the local paper did this big spread on us, and we were called the Arnolds. And so people used to shout, "Hey, Arnold!" But it was never aggressive. But once Malcolm McLaren made punk rock a public kind of phenomena, people wanted to punch you in the face, and it was really depressing. You know, which is why I kind of moved on to something even more outrageous, because, I mean, the more sort of... You find that the more outrageous you look, the less people want to bump you anyway. Because you become like an unknown commodity, you know. Like,
what was the more outrageous aspect you went into?
Well, you know, when a couple of years later, when I started working in a shop in Carnaby Street, I used to come in the morning and I used to wear high heels, everything, you know, and there used to be skinheads on the corner, hundreds of them. And I used to some days I used to have to get out of the cab and walk past them. And they never used to say anything to me. They'd whistle and kind of make abuse. But they never came anywhere near me. And, you know, some used to come into the shop. And, you know, like, we used to sell a lot of Jewish stars. You know, it's when Culture Club first started, we said the Mogadovim with the Tabot Agadah, which was Culture Club in Hebrew, and all these kind of Jewish things. And they used to come in and say, ooh, you know, is this a Jewish shop? And I would kind of come, you know, and say, can I help you? You know, like, they would walk out, you know, because of the way I looked, which was quite funny. But I used to kind of wear, I don't know, I can't describe what I used to wear. Similar to what I wear now, but just a little bit more like fruit and birds and, you know, this, that and the other.
When Boy George left home, he lived here in a squat. The conditions then were squalid, but the company was exotic.
Me and George and everyone else would sort of like go around, we'd get evicted once every 6 months, so we'd have to go and look, constantly on the look for new places to move in. The council always put like these ring bars like that with a great big chain through. We used to go around about 3 o'clock in the morning with like crowbars and everything, trying to get all these like, things off the council estates. I don't know, just sort of moving around all the time. It's like gypsies, really.
It was kind of a constant battle for the hairspray, you know. Everybody was kind of, you know, Hazy Fantasy, you've heard of that. Well, the guy Jeremy, and I used to live with Jeremy and Marilyn. You know, when Marilyn first came to move in with us, I mean, even before he moved in with us, he was completely outrageous. He lived with his mother in Boreham Wood, but he was like dressing up as Marilyn Monroe. And he wasn't what I would describe as a kind of shy person. He was like 15, and he came to the house, and we were all in bed, and the door came flying in. It was like, hi, everyone.
Well, I've known him for a few years before that, and I just thought, you know, it was my right to sort of move in. So I just sort of turned up one night, and he was in bed with someone at the time. I just sort of like kicked the door down because he wouldn't answer the door, and I knew he was in because I could see through the letterbox, the covers going up and down.
What were you doing in those days?
Generally just trying to get as much attention as possible for the most minute scrap of talent, really.